Hello and welcome to today's webinar on key facts about ISAs. My name is Lisa Webster and I'm Senior Technical Consultant here at AJ Bell. So to start off with then, we'll have a little look through the basics. Then I'm going to look at the criteria for applying subscriptions for ISAs, look at transfers, withdrawals, what happens when an ISA holder dies, and I will finish off with a few planning points. So let's start off with the basics then. So what is an ISA? Well, in simple terms, it's an individual savings account. So by that, it means only an individual can open an account. So you can't have joint accounts or trust or corporate accounts or anything like that. It is a personal account for one individual. It's a kind of tax wrapper. And subscriptions into an ISA are paid from taxed earnings. So that's a little bit different to pensions, where obviously you can put money in and get tax relief on the way in, or you can take it out from sort of pre-tax earnings. So it goes in, it's income that's already been taxed is then used as a subscription for that money to go into an ISA. But once it's in there, then the tax wrapper bit kicks in really, and you have your tax-free growth. So there's no income tax on any income on your investments within an ISA, and no capital gains when investments are sold within the ISA wrapper. So it is tax-free growth, income and capital gains within the wrapper. And then when it comes to withdrawals, taking your money out of the ISA, it can be paid out in full, no restrictions and no tax on it. The only exceptions for that is lifetime ISAs and junior ISAs, which I'll look at those as we go through the different rules that apply for those types of ISAs. But most adult ISAs, when it comes to withdrawals, you can take it out, say, tax-free. So it's what we call tax exempt or TEE, because it's out of taxed income on the way in, but once it's in, it's exempt from tax, and it's exempt from tax on the way out. So this is the opposite way round to a pension, because pension obviously you get tax relief on the way in, so it's exempt. The middle bit's the same, exempt, but you do pay tax on the way out, with the exception of your tax-free cash bit. But yeah, it's the opposite way around. So it's a TEE for ISAs. We have different types of ISAs that are available on the market and allowed under HMRC rules. So first type is a cash ISA, which I think is fairly self-explanatory as to what you can do with that one, invest in cash. The next one we have is a stocks and shares ISA. So stocks and shares ISA is what we offer on Invest Centre, and it lets you invest in, unsurprisingly, stocks and shares. There is a list from HMRC for ISA managers of what are qualifying investments. So again, it's a bit different than pensions, where we don't have qualifying list as such. There is a specified list from HMRC about what can be allowed in a stocks and shares ISA. So basically, it's regulated funds, listed shares on a recognised stock exchange, securities, which is generally going to be listed companies or governments, obviously bonds, gilts, cash you can still hold in it, depository interest, etc., etc. But it is, a specified list for a stocks and shares ISA. Next on the list we have is an innovative finance ISA. So these are relatively new. It's peer-to-peer lending. So it is a little bit higher risk. There's not been a huge take-up on there. There aren't a lot of innovative finance providers out there. They've had a bit of scrutiny in recent years as well, because I think people, general public customers, consumers, however you want to call it, think ISAs are relatively simple and easy to understand and relatively safe, and because it's got this wrapper around it and it's called an ISA, people think that's a safer investment, whereas innovative finance, by the very nature of it, peer-to-peer lending, is relatively high risk. The FCA have been looking at that a bit, and it's kind of do people understand those risks really, that it is higher risk in nature? So there's a few questions about that. It's not something we are involved in, and it's not a huge take-up in the market, but they are out there. And then the final one I've got on here is lifetime ISA. Now, a lifetime ISA, so there are different rules in terms of paying your money in and withdrawals and what you can use it for, which I'll cover today. But you can, the underlying investments on it, you can actually have a cash lifetime ISA, or you can have a stocks and shares lifetime ISA. So the investments are the same as cash or stocks and shares, but just like the wrapper's a little bit different with it. And yes, so the lifetime ISA that we offer at Invest Centre is a stocks and shares lifetime ISA. Other ones you might think about which aren't on there, obviously the obvious one is junior ISA. So you can have a junior version of a cash ISA or a junior stocks and shares ISA. And again, our junior stocks and shares ISA we have, junior ISA I should say, is a stocks and shares ISA. And the other one that is still in existence is a help to buy ISA. So you can't open up a help to buy ISA anymore, it's closed for new business, but you may have clients that have an existing help to buy ISA who can continue to save into that going forward, but say that nobody can open a new one. And help to buy ISA is just a type of cash ISA. So moving on to applying and subscribing, you know, who's eligible, who can have an ISA, and then, you know, how much can they put into it and how. So there's different eligibility criteria for the different kinds of ISAs, basically based on age, residency, and what other ISAs they have or have pay into. So you can start off with a cash ISA, and for a lot of people it will be their first kind of ISA would be a cash ISA, which you can open up once you're 16. Basically, when you open it, you have to be a UK resident, or you can be a Crown employee, so somebody employed by the UK government working overseas, which the most common example of that would be somebody in the armed forces who's based overseas. They can still have, or their spouse can still open a cash ISA. You can only subscribe to one cash ISA in any tax year. You can hold as many cash ISAs as you like. So you could theoretically open a new cash ISA with a different provider every tax year and pay into them. I'm not quite sure why you'd want to keep doing that, but you can. The rules will allow that, as long as you only pay into one cash ISA in any particular tax year. Stocks and shares ISA, then the criteria is the same, you just have to be over 18. So the age criteria is different, the residency is the same. And again, you can only subscribe to one stocks and shares ISA in the tax year, but you can subscribe to a cash ISA and a stocks and shares ISA in the same year, that's fine. And you can have multiple stocks and shares ISAs open, as long as you only pay into each one of them, only pay into any one of them in each tax year. And if you finance, criteria is the same as stocks and shares ISAs. Lifetime ISA is a bit different then. So lifetime ISA, you can only apply for and open a lifetime ISA if you are from your 18th birthday up until the day before you turn 40. So the last date you can open it, say, is when you are 39 and 364 days. On that, once you've hit your 40th birthday, it's too late. So it has to be opened before that date. Again, you have to be UK resident or Crown employee, and you can only pay in to one lifetime ISA in any tax year, though you can have multiple ones open. Final one on there then is the junior ISA. So junior ISA is for somebody under the age of 18. They have to be UK resident when the junior ISA is opened for them. They can be a Crown employee working overseas, but obviously given the fact you're going to be under 18, that's probably less likely, though not impossible. But you can also be a dependent. So if you have you know, a parent that is working overseas in the army or something like that, their children can open junior ISAs for their children, that's fine as well. But the difference with junior ISAs is you can only hold one junior ISA of each type. So you can have a cash junior ISA and a stocks and shares junior ISA. Probably not that common to have both, but it is allowed. But you can't open one junior stocks and shares ISA 1 year and open another one the following year and still hold both of them. You can't do that. If you've got a junior ISA, junior stocks and shares ISA, and you want to move to a different provider, you'd have to transfer your existing one and then pay into it. You can't hold two at the same time. So it is a little bit different on that one. In terms of applications then, so obviously you as an advisor, you can make online applications on behalf of your clients. But if for any reason that a paper form is involved, then it has to be signed by an investor. You can't open an ISA for your clients by way of paper without them signing it. Yeah, you can only do that online. It's against just HMRC rules. Or an attorney. You can have, if someone's got a lasting or enduring power of attorney, they can open it up. On their behalf. Junior ISA is slightly different. So only the legal guardian can apply to open the account, or get an advisor. You as an advisor can open for your clients. We do quite often get asked about grandparents wanting to open a junior ISA for their grandchildren. And the answer is no, they are not allowed to do it under HMRC rules. It has to be whoever the legal guardian is, somebody with parental responsibility. They are the only people, or advisors, they're advisors on their behalf, that can open a junior ISA. And that registered contact must be at least 16 years old. And obviously, if you're opening for a child, there's probably not many 16-year-old parents that are going to be opening junior ISAs, but theoretically, that is possible. But yeah, basically, it's the parent that has to do it. So looking at subscriptions, once we've got the accounts open, you've had your eligibility criteria, you've got your subscriptions. Adults then, as I've said, can subscribe to one of each type of ISA in each tax year. Money must belong to an investor. Now, that might sound a little bit strange, sort of how that's phrased, but it does come from the ISA manager's guidance. So, because most circumstances, the subscriptions we're going to see are going to come out of a bank account in the ISA holder's name, paying into their ISA. Vast majority of cases. However, basically, the rules state that it has to be the ISA holder's money that is paid in, not somebody else's money. But ISA managers are allowed to accept third-party subscriptions as long as they don't have any reason to believe it's not the ISA holder's money, and so it can be like gifts. So, subject to usual AML checks, we will allow. It's usually a partner, isn't it? Partner, spouse, paying into their spouse's ISA, subscribing to them. But I say that might, differ between ISA managers. Some might specify it has to come out of, the ISA holder's account. They're being really strict on it, but there is a little bit of sort of leeway in the rules, as long as you say we don't have reason to believe it's not their money, then it can be accepted. General rule is it has to be paid in cash, subscriptions. The only exceptions are, save as you earn share incentive plans, when they mature, that they can be paid into as a subscription into an ISA. But generally speaking, that aside, it has to be a cash subscription. So if you have somebody that holds shares outside of an ISA, investments, which are allowable stocks and shares ISA investments, though you can't pay the shares in directly, you can do a bed and ISA. Which are quite common, and I think particularly this tax year will be even more prevalent because of the cuts that we have in CGT allowances and dividend allowances that are coming up with a new tax year. People making the most of their allowances. So if you have shares that you want to get into a tax wrapper and get into the ISA, but you don't want to sell the shares generally, but there's a gain on them, what you can do is sell those shares, and then transfer that cash into the ISA, and then immediately buy them back again. So you're not out of the market for a long period of time. That way you crystallise the gain to use up your capital gains tax allowance this year, and then you get it into the ISA wrapper, therefore protecting it from any future gains. Obviously, that has to be subject to you having enough allowance in your annual allowance for ISAs. But yeah, there's certainly this year in particular, say because we know the CGT allowance is being cut, an opportunity there. If somebody has got gains and they have got available ISA allowance to crystallise the gains, get the money into the tax wrapper. So the subscription limit, talked about this, the annual investment limit on it is £20,000. So that's across, say it can be across lots of different types of ISAs. They can have cash, stocks and shares, innovative finance. They might have a lifetime ISA as well. Now the lifetime ISA has a separate limit of £4,000 a year, but that sits within the overall £20,000 limit. So somebody's got a lifetime ISA, it's paid in £4,000. To that, they have £16,000 to spend in other ISAs. But if they've only put 2,000 into their lifetime ISA, they can put 18,000 elsewhere. So yeah, it's just to say there's two limits, but the lifetime ISA is within the overall £20,000 limit. When it comes to making subscriptions then, there are sort of two ways of doing it depending on the ISA manager, whether they operate what we call continuous applications or whether you have to have separate applications, both of which are allowed under HMRC rules. So some ISA managers will effectively, if you subscribe to ISAs with them in consecutive years, you are opening a new ISA every year with them when you make that first subscription in each of the tax year. So you're opening up, and some of them will even keep them ring fenced in separate pots. So you actually end up with a series of ISAs if you do it over a series of years. The way we do ours is we operate what we call a continuous application. So which means when you apply to and have an ISA with us and you make subscriptions, as long as you keep making subscriptions every year, you don't have to reapply, and it's all one pot. Everything goes in for each successive tax year. However, if there is a year when no subscriptions are made, then under HMRC rules, because it's broken, you would have to reapply for an ISA. You'd have to make a fresh application for an ISA. The only exceptions on this are lifetime ISAs and junior ISAs, where it doesn't matter if you've a gap, you can carry on. So technically speaking, if you have an ISA, even if the ISA manager operates continuous applications as we do, and somebody doesn't subscribe for a tax year, when you come to put some more money in again, in a couple of years' time, you have to do a new application. However, in practice, the way we do that is, because you've already got an account number with us and a reference with us, is, when you do your subscription form or the online form for it, effectively the application is inbuilt in that process, so you don't have to go right the way back to the start. But technically from HMRC rules, the way it works, that's the way it has to be done. And I say you might find slight differences between providers depending on how they choose to operate it. Looking a little bit more sort of specifically at lifetime ISA payments. So I say there is this limit with lifetime ISAs, which is a separate limit to the overall £20,000 limit. Of £4,000. Now that can be paid in from 18th birthday, which is the first day you could open a lifetime ISA, up until age 49, so the day before you turn 50. So you have from 18th birthday to the day before you turn 40 to open the lifetime ISA. But once it's open, you then have a further 10 years when you can pay in, because you can pay in up until the day before you turn 50. So yeah, you can pay into those dates. Just another point on that one, when you're opening a lifetime ISA, to open for a lifetime ISA to count as open, the payment has to have gone into it. You have to have made a subscription. So you can't open a lifetime ISA the day before you turn 40 and then pay into it a couple of days later. It isn't classed as being an opened account. It has to have the money in it, be fully opened before you turn 40 on that one. But so then you can carry on paying in. Any payments going into the lifetime ISA get a 25% bonus. So the maximum you can pay in is £4,000 a year. You can pay any amount up to that, either one-off or regular, or however you want to do it. And whatever you pay in, you get that 25% bonus into the lifetime ISA. It's not possible to pay in more than £4,000, but not get the bonus. You're just not allowed to pay in more than £4,000 a year. And then the ISA manager will claim the bonus from HMRC on a monthly basis. So it works in a fairly similar way, you know, as relief at source on pensions. So, you know, it can take, you know, a couple of months, depending on the timing of when you pay it in, for that bonus to get paid into the account. Just a little example, really, point on the one of each ISA type rule. So each tax year you can only save into one ISA of each type. But what happens if you sort of make a payment into one ISA and then you transfer it to a different type, how that counts? So as an example here, if David subscribes £10,000 into a cash ISA on 14th of April 22 and he transfers that into a stocks and shares ISA on 20th of May, so still in the same tax year, basically that's as if he's paid it straight into his stocks and shares ISA. So he can carry on saving into that stocks and shares ISA, that's fine. He's still got another £10,000 of allowance, but he can also save into a new cash ISA with a different provider if he wanted to. That's because at the end of the tax year, when ISA managers do their reporting to HMRC, it's going to be reported as 10,000 paid into that stocks and shares ISA. There isn't going to be a report going in from the cash ISA manager because it's already been transferred out. So he could open another one on that basis. Looking at junior ISAs now and their subscriptions, so they have a separate limit which is £9,000 a year. And again, it can be into one or both types, so cash and stocks and shares junior ISAs. I think it would be relatively unusual to have both, but yeah, technically possible. You can split it. So anybody can subscribe to a junior ISA. So we don't have to, you know, check that it definitely belongs to the member. You know, expectation isn't really, you know, children probably wouldn't have money otherwise. You know, it is treated as a gift to the child. So as I mentioned before, we do get grandparents asking quite a lot about if they can, you know, set up junior ISAs, and they can't, but there's absolutely no issue with them paying in to junior ISAs. They can't manage it. To say it does have to be the parent registered contact who manages, you know, along with their advisor, manages the account, but yeah, they can pay into it. There's a little bit of a quirk, if you like, because if you're 16 or 17, you're still young enough to have a junior ISA, so you get the junior ISA allowance, but you are also old enough to have an adult allowance because you can have a cash ISA at the age of 16, and so you have a £20,000 limit as well. So if there's 2 years there where you have very generous allowances for say older children or younger adults, you know, 16 and 17-year-olds, because you can pay into both effectively, because they are separate allowances. Just a point on subscriptions as well. For junior ISAs, the child has to be resident in the UK when the junior ISA is set up, as we looked at the start with the criteria. But they can continue to subscribe even if they move overseas. So if you had a family who were, you know, all based in the UK, they all set up ISAs, so mum and dad have got an ISA each, they've got a couple of kids that've got junior ISAs, and they move abroad and settle abroad somewhere, mum and dad can't carry on paying into their ISAs because you have to be a UK resident at the time that you pay in when you make your subscription to an adult ISA. However, it doesn't apply to the children, so you could carry on funding children's junior ISAs even though they're abroad. Just one of those little quirks in the rules that are in there, so it is possible to carry on. You know, and the subscriber, you know, whether that's the parents or whoever it is, or, you know, if you have children that are resident in the UK but they have relatives abroad, they can still subscribe to a junior ISA for the child, again subject to the usual AML checks going on. A couple more things to talk about just in relation to subscriptions, and I suppose a little bit when things go wrong, if you like, about repair and voiding on subscriptions. So at the end of each tax year, the ISA manager has to report their current year subscriptions to HMRC. So at the end of the tax year, so because obviously ISA managers have to have checks in place, so, you know, you can't pay more than £20,000 into our stocks and shares ISA. our systems won't let you do that. However, if you paid in £20,000 to us, we wouldn't know if you paid in £10,000 with another ISA manager somewhere else. There's no way we can check that. So it can happen that people might oversubscribe, or they may breach the rules, as in because they might subscribe to more than one type in a tax year, and the ISA manager wouldn't know about that. The way that gets identified, as I say, is at the end of the tax year, because all the ISA managers report their subscriptions to HMRC. So HMRC can then identify anything that's invalid, and then they instruct the ISA manager to carry out the action. So normally, if it's been a case of somebody's oversubscribed, maybe they've put 15,000 into a stocks and shares ISA and 10,000 into a cash ISA. It'll be whichever subscription came last. Basically, the HMRC will tell the ISA manager to remove it. If they've done an invalid, combination, then again, it's the one that'll be last. Now, we do get times where a client will realise they've made a mistake. They've put in too much or an invalid combination or something, and they've asked us to repair it, but we can't do that. It won't class as repair because we still have to report to HMRC. We can only do the repairs once we're instructed by HMRC. So the client can contact HMRC if they don't want to wait until the end of the tax year for it to be sorted out anyway. But we can't do it on their behalf. We're not allowed to discuss it with HMRC directly. So the client can go to HMRC, HMRC can tell us what we can do with it. But we need to have that instruction from HMRC. So normally, if it's oversubscriptions and things like that, then we can have over the allowances, I should say, then a repair can be made and that subscription can be removed. But there are voiding, where the ISA has to be closed completely. So if a subscription is invalid because they've had two ISAs of the same type in the tax year, and say whichever one's second, basically that one will have to be removed and that ISA will be voided. So tax wrap is removed, paid back. Any tax that would be due has to be paid. If the application is invalid, they made invalid declarations, they don't meet the age requirements criteria or the residency criteria or whatever it is. Investments are non-qualifying. That's a pretty unusual one, to be honest, because the ISA manager wouldn't normally allow it in the first place. But there are cases where it has to be terminated and it has to be, the whole wrapper has to be removed. Let's say that then there would be the tax to pay on it. Okay, turning now to transfers. So things are a little bit more relaxed now with transfers on adult ISAs. It used to be the case that there were restrictions on transferring between different types of ISAs, but it's been a few years now where that's been more relaxed. So you can freely transfer between cash, stocks and shares and innovative finance ISAs. In practice, we see cash and stocks and shares ISA transfers are fairly common. So there's not a big take up on innovative finance ISAs. When you do a transfer, then the reporting responsibility moves with the transfer. So if you've done a transfer from a cash ISA and you go into a stocks and shares ISA and you've made subscriptions in the tax year, and then you do in the same tax year, you make transfer, then when obviously the funds move across, the reporting requirements move across as well. So the seeding ISA manager will tell the new ISA manager, what subscriptions have been made, on what dates they are, and the amounts, and then they get reported by the new manager as if it's been paid into their account, into that ISA in that tax year on that. You may, and the same, if it was just a stocks and shares to stocks and shares ISA as well, it's the same thing. It just gets passed on at transfer. So there has to be an agreement in place between the ISA managers as to what the date of transfer is. Particularly, say, if you're doing stocks and shares to stocks and shares, if you're re-registering assets across between them, it might not always come across all on one day. Now, if you were doing it in, July and August, that's fine, you know, a few days here and there doesn't make any difference. But obviously if you're doing it around tax year end, then it can be quite crucial as to what the agreed date of the transfer is between the two transfer managers, because, you know, wherever it sits on the 5th of April, that's who's going to be reporting it to HMRC on that. Some of you may have spotted, I'm sure, that lifetime ISA is not included in this diagram, and that is because there are separate rules regarding transfers to and from lifetime ISAs. It's not as free a transfer as between the other types, but I'll come on to that shortly. The other thing, just going to talk about briefly, is partial transfers. So yeah, if you're doing a full transfer, the whole ISA transferring across, that's quite straightforward. Partial transfers are allowed in the rules, and we're seeing a lot more partial transfers since the introduction of lifetime ISAs, which when I explain about the transfer rules with them, you'll see why that's apparent. But the basic rule when it comes to partial transfers is that current year subscriptions must always be kept together. So if you've had an ISA that's been going for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years or something, you'll have a mixture. You may have had subscriptions paid in this tax year, and you've got subscriptions that have been made up in previous tax years, and obviously those have been invested, you have investment returns and everything all in there. If you want to do a transfer, the first option is you can transfer just your current year subscriptions and leave the previous year subscriptions where they are. You can transfer just your previous year subscriptions and leave the current year subscriptions behind. You can split your previous year subscriptions because there's no problems with that. Or you could do your current year subscriptions and a bit of your previous year subscriptions. And this is all because of the reporting, because basically, you know, as I've just said, when you do a transfer from one ISA to another ISA, the reporting requirements move with the transfer. So any current year subscriptions have to be reported by the new ISA manager, if there are any. So you can't split it. So because you can't have two ISA managers reporting on the current year subscriptions. So basically, you just have to keep them together. So in options 1 and 4, when that transfer is made, the reporting requirement for the current year subscriptions gets transferred over as well. In options 2 and 3, it stays with the seeding provider because they've kept the current year subscriptions. So looking at lifetime ISA transfers now. So different ways you can do a transfer to a lifetime ISA. So you can transfer current year subscriptions from another kind of ISA, transfer previous year subscriptions from a different kind of ISA, or you can put those together and do a whole transfer, or it could be, as long as your current year subscriptions are together, it could be partial, it could be a bit of your previous year subscriptions. They can go to a lifetime ISA, or you can do a LISA to LISA transfer. So if you did a LISA to LISA transfer, you're not using any of your LISA allowance, your LISA limit, because it's already in a lifetime ISA. It's going to have got a bonus on it already, which I'll talk about in a bit. Sorry, I've already talked about your bonus. So once you've got because you've had a bonus paid on your lifetime ISA already, when you transfer it into a lifetime ISA, you know, there's no bonus to be claimed. It's just a straightforward transfer. But if you transfer from a different type of ISA, so most commonly it's going to be a cash ISA or a stocks and shares ISA, into a lifetime ISA, that's going to be restricted to your LISA payment limit. So if you've not paid into a LISA before, or in this tax year, you can do a transfer of up to £4,000 from an existing ISA into your lifetime ISA. And because that's not been in a lifetime ISA before, it's not got a bonus on it, that will then get the 25% government bonus when it goes into the lifetime ISA. And so this is why you might want to split, you know, monies that you've got in an ISA already, because if somebody doesn't have any new savings to pay into a lifetime ISA, but they've got ISA savings, but they want to pay it into a lifetime ISA to get the bonus, then they might want to split what they've got in their existing ISA to transfer that across to get in that bonus. So a couple of examples then of how you could do this. So if you have somebody with cash ISA, they've paid £3,000 into their cash ISA in the current tax year, they've had some interest on it, so that is now worth £3,050. They don't have any other funds to invest, but they want to pay into a lifetime ISA because they want to get the bonus, maybe they're saving for a house. So if they do that transfer across, that's fine because it's within their lifetime ISA limit. They've still only used £3,000 of their overall ISA allowance because that's the only money that's come from, if you like, the outside world into an ISA environment. But because when they did the transfer, it was £3,050, and that's what they'll get the bonus on, they've used £3,050 of their lifetime ISA allowance. So basically it means they've got £17,000 left of the overall ISA allowance. Up to 950 of that can be paid into the lifetime ISA. Quick question on there is, what if the current year subscriptions are £5,000? And the answer to that is, well, of course, you can't split current year subscriptions, so they can't do the transfer because you haven't got the option of a partial transfer then. I mean, if they really didn't have any other money, you know, they were going to be nowhere near using the £20,000 allowance, you might consider withdrawing it and then paying it in, leaving £1,000 behind in the cash ISA, possibly. But obviously, you know, they've got headroom to do that in their allowance because it would be using up more of the allowance if they did it that way. Another example, transferring to a lifetime ISA if it's previous year subscriptions only. This one we have an account value of £7,050 on the transfer date. You can split that, so you could just do a partial transfer of the £4,000 maximum into a lifetime ISA, which would use their ISA allowance for the year but doesn't use any of their overall ISA allowance because we've not made any subscriptions in this year. So this is why we didn't used to allow partial transfers, but we do allow partial transfers now, and it's really because of lifetime ISAs, and it creates a little bit more demand for it, for splitting it on there. Transfers between lifetime ISAs, that they can be done freely. You know, if it's already with a lifetime ISA, you just want to change it to a new manager, that's fine. If somebody has paid in but the claim hasn't gone through to HMRC yet, but the new manager would make the claim. If you'd made a subscription into the lifetime ISA, the manager had started the claim progress, put the claim in, but the monies hadn't been received, and that would be forwarded to the new manager, so it follows them on. The government charge on that one. There's no age restrictions on lifetime ISA transfers as well, so you had to be under 40 when you opened your original lifetime ISA, but even if you are now over 40, it doesn't stop you being able to open up a new lifetime ISA and transfer with a new manager and transfer it in, and then carry on paying in up until the day before your 50th birthday on that. Junior ISAs then, transfers for junior ISAs. So you can transfer between a cash and a stocks and shares junior ISA, that's fine. Or you could do, obviously if you wanted to change a different ISA manager, so you have a stocks and shares junior ISA already, but you wanted to change to another manager, you can do that. So the rule is just that the child can only hold one of each type at a time. So you would, if you were doing a junior stocks and shares ISA to a junior stocks and shares ISA, you open the new account with the express purpose of transferring the old one in. So there's a set period of time when you can do that, so you're not holding both on an ongoing basis, but obviously from a practical point of view, you have to have an account open to be able to transfer into it. Child trust funds, similarly, they can also be transferred, must be transferred in full. So it used to be the case for a long time that you couldn't transfer child trust funds into junior ISAs, so you can, but you can't hold a child trust fund and a junior ISA. Again, you have to open the junior ISA with the express purpose of transferring the child trust fund in, and you have 60 days for that to happen, or else the junior ISA would be invalid on that. And when you're doing the transfer, it has to be the same registered contact for both of them. So you can't have, the child trust fund, and mum's the registered contact, and then dad opens the junior ISA and does the transfer. That doesn't work. You would have to have the same parent on both sides of it. I mean, once it's come across, you can change the registered contact if you wanted to for any reason on that. Just a little bit more on child trust funds. So child trust funds, you can't have new ones anymore, but there are a lot of them still around because they were for children born before 1st of September 2002 up until January 2011. So we had relatively recently, just a year and a half ago, we had the first ones maturing when those first children reached 18. So you used to get a starting voucher from government, so it's money actually paid in. As I've said, you can't hold both of them, but you can transfer them. When you do transfer a child trust fund, there is an opportunity to get a lot more subscriptions in, if clients are in a position to do that for their children. But it's because the child trust fund has its own allowance. It is the same as the junior ISA allowance, so you can pay £9,000 a year into a child trust fund, same as you can to a junior ISA, but they are separate. So, example I've got here with our timeline. First thing is that the year for making payments into child trust funds, it doesn't run in tax years, it runs from the child's birthday. So in this example here, we've got a child whose birthday is the 1st of August. So might have made a subscription into a child trust fund at the start of this tax year. So at some point after 6th of April 2022, and you can pay a £9,000 subscription. They then have their birthday in August, which resets the year for the child trust fund subscriptions. So you can pay another £9,000 in. If you then decide to do a transfer to a junior ISA, at some point after that second subscription, junior ISA runs in tax years, your subscriptions. So you can make a subscription to that junior ISA still, because it's a separate limited child trust fund, so you can still make one. So you can actually pay in 3 subscriptions in one tax year when you transfer, because the different alignments and because they are separate allowances. And then obviously after 6th of April 23, you could pay in another one. So you could it could be less than 12 months where you could get in 4 subscriptions for a child. So, there's opportunity there. People have the means and the inclination to really boost their children's funds, to get quite a lot of money in there. Okay, moving on to withdrawals then. So most adult accounts are very straightforward. You can take your money out whenever you want, and this is completely tax-free. The exception on it is for lifetime ISA, which I will look at in a minute. So very simple, take it out when you like, completely tax-free. Junior accounts is obviously the opposite, so you can't take it out at all. So junior ISAs, no withdrawals are permitted. The only exception on that, which thankfully I don't think I've ever seen, we've had one, is if the child is terminally ill, in which case you need the medical evidence from that and get permission, and the ISA manager would get permission from HMRC to pay it out. But thankfully rare. Basically, you can't get your money out. It sits there until you turn 18 on a junior ISA. A little bit on flexible ISA rules then. So all ISAs can choose now, all adult ISAs I should say, except lifetime ISA, whether to be flexible or not. So the rules on flexible ISAs came in back in 2016, but say they are optional, so it's down to the ISA manager. So if you're not sure, it's worth checking with the ISA manager which rules apply. So the old rules, the non-flexible ISA rules, basically means if somebody subscribed £10,000 and withdrew £10,000 in the same tax year, and then subscribed £10,000, £20,000 would be reported to HMRC. The fact you've made a withdrawal is completely irrelevant. It just looks at the amount of money that's been paid in the tax year. That's what gets reported. Flexible ISAs rules, then it does make a difference. So if you subscribe and then you make a withdrawal, and then you can replace basically what you've withdrawn in the same tax year and it's like the net amount that is reported to HMRC. So in that example, 10,000 paid in, you've drawn 10,000, that's what cancelled it out. You then subscribe another 10,000, that's what gets reported at the end of the tax year. So our ISA, the Invest Centre ISA, is flexible ISA. We have changed that relatively recently, but yeah, it is a flexible ISA now on that. Lifetime ISA then. So this is a little bit different. Lifetime ISAs are basically designed for two purposes, first-time house purchase and retirement. A bit of a strange combination, but there you go. So there's only certain circumstances when you can have charge-free withdrawals. So first one I say is house purchase. So you can take money out of a lifetime ISA to purchase a house. You have to be a first-time buyer, so you have to have not owned property anywhere in the UK or overseas, and that includes any property you've inherited or a share of property, any legal title to property that you've had. You can't have had that for you to be a first-time buyer. It has to be bought with a mortgage. It has to be worth £450,000 or less, the house that you're buying. You can purchase jointly with somebody else, whether or not they are a first-time buyer. That's fine, as long as the individual who's using the lifetime ISA is a first-time buyer, then it is allowed. And actually, with the withdrawal on that, it is not the individual that withdraws the funds. It has to be paid directly to the conveyancer who is acting on the property purchase. They have declarations they have to fill in, and if for any reason the house purchase falls through, the money gets returned to the lifetime ISA. So specific circumstances around that, you can have charge-free withdrawals for lifetime ISA. The other one, which does catch people out a little bit with the house purchase, is you have to have had the lifetime ISA open for at least 12 months before you can make a charge-free withdrawal for house purchase. So you can't just pay money in, get the bonus, and then immediately use it to purchase a house. It does have to have been open for 12 months. If you transfer from a lifetime ISA to lifetime ISA, it's 12 months from when the first one started. So that 12-month period, the clock starts ticking with the first one if you transfer it across. But yeah, just one, it has caught out a few people, that one. The other one is your 60th birthday. So, I mean, lifetime ISA only was introduced in 2017, so we haven't had anybody do that yet because you have to be under 40 to open it. So, you know, we're not going to have that till at least 2037. But yeah, it's there for once your 60th birthday comes along. Then you can take money out freely, as you could do with any other kind of adult ISA. So those are what it's designed for. The other exceptions are serious ill health. If you have less than 12 months to live, and we have medical evidence of that, then that can be paid out charge-free as well. And then the other one is obviously on death. It can be paid out to the estate without any tax charges on it. Any other withdrawal for a lifetime ISA, other than those specified reasons, there will be a 25% withdrawal charge. So, you know, if clients are taking out a lifetime ISA, obviously they need to be aware that it's not as flexible. Yes, you have the bonus, but it's not as flexible. And if you decide, you know, for whatever reason you need the money not to buy your house and, you know, not waiting until your 60th birthday, then there is a penalty to pay. It's also important that they understand that the 25% bonus on the way in isn't the same as the 25% withdrawal charge on the way out. You know, you just hear those two figures and it's easy to think that actually, well, it's just repaying the bonus, but obviously it's not. You know, it's worse than that. It is penal, because if you pay in £4,000, your maximum subscription in a year, you get your government bonus of £1,000. You've now got £5,000 in your lifetime ISA. If you took it immediately out again, the 25% charge is 25% of the 5,000. So HMRC would get £1,250. The investor gets £3,750. So they've just lost £250. So, you know, it's just important that people understand that before they take out the lifetime ISA, because, you know, you see the 25%, you think it's the same thing if you don't think about it properly and think it through. So yeah, it's an important one that people are aware of. Okay, finally on withdrawals. With junior ISA, as I said, you can't, basically, the terminal illness exception, you can't take money out of a junior ISA. It stays in there locked up until their 18th birthday. So obviously it's very important that people who are funding these junior ISAs realise that, you know, once the money's in there, that's it, there's no getting it out. So there's a couple of options on here. The one we've got on the left there, you know, is you could make a withdrawal, pay some of it, all of it, depending on the value, up to £4,000 into a lifetime ISA and get a bonus, because obviously once you hit your 18th birthday, you're eligible for a lifetime ISA. If people wanting to use it to get on the property ladder, they might choose to do that with some of it. Obviously on the right hand side, they could take all the money, because basically once you're over 18, you've got free access to it. You can take it all out and do what they like with it. But the default option, if they don't do anything with it, is on their 18th birthday, it turns into an adult ISA. So, you know, we have a process when a child turns 18 that, you know, we write out to them, you know, get the details, and basically they take it over rather than having their parent or legal guardian, you know, running it, if you like. So the registered contact, you know, if they're an adult now, they can take responsibility for it themselves. But it is an adult ISA. It automatically turns into an adult ISA. So therefore, you have, you know, free access to it. So withdrawals on that. Okay, nearly there now. Moving on to death. What happens when an ISA holder dies? So it used to be the case that the ISA would end on death effectively. The tax wrapper would be immediately removed, you know, and all the tax advantages would go. Thankfully, that's no longer the case now. So we have what's called a continuing account of a deceased investor. So it can continue as a tax wrapper, and it'll only end when either the executor closes it, the administration of the estate is completed, or if that hasn't happened within 3 years, then it will close after 3 years after the date of death. So basically, you've got 3 years to sort everything out, and it can carry on in that tax advantaged environment. So no income tax or CGT on it. It's important to note ISAs are part of the deceased estate for inheritance tax purposes, so it's not like a pension, doesn't have those tax advantages. It is included in the estate. So you know, it could be the executor could decide, right, we're just going to sell all the investments, pay it down, and then it just goes into the estate for distribution along with everything else from the deceased. There is an option of transferring the investment into a spouse's ISA. Spouse or civil partner, you can transfer them across too. And the way we can do this is via an additional permitted subscription. So say spouse or civil partner that they have to be living with at the time, so you can't do it if they're separated. They can inherit the deceased allowance. And it's an interesting one because it's the allowance they inherit rather than they don't necessarily directly inherit the assets. So, you know, you could have the assets go paid into the estate, get distributed to somebody else, but the spouse would still have this additional permitted subscription, this extra ISA allowance. And the additional permitted subscription, this additional allowance that they inherit, is the greater value of the value of the ISA at date of death or when the ISA is closed. So, you know, if markets have gone up since date of death, the value of the ISA when it's eventually closed and sorted will be higher. And it's really to allow that the spouse, you know, they can keep it in the tax wrapper of an ISA. So they can put it into an ISA in their own name. By using the additional permitted subscriptions, they will allow that to be transferred in. They have 180 days after the administration is completed or 3 years after the date of death, the later of those, to use their additional permitted subscription. And yes, then we need to have confirmation of what that amount is before that can be fulfilled. So, you know, normally, you know, it would be a case of, you know, if the spouse inherited the assets, you know, the additional permitted subscription, they have an ISA in their own name, you could transfer using this allowance, and it wouldn't count towards their own. They'd still have their own £20,000 allowance as normal for the year, but it allows them to transfer in as a permitted subscription the assets from their deceased spouse's ISA on that. Just a quick example on this: Evelyn and Roy are married. Roy dies, leaving his estate to Evelyn, including his ISAs, £75,000 at date of death. By the time the estate, the administration is completed, it's gone up to 78,000. Basically means she can pay in 98,000 into an ISA in that tax year. So she's got the £20,000 normal allowance plus a £78,000 APS. And I say she can ask the manager to transfer Roy's ISA to her ISA. She could, you know, equally pay it from her own money. It's not a directly linked. It's not you inheriting the ISA assets. It is you basically get the allowance, which you can then use to transfer it across if that's what you want to do. Okay, just to finish off with then a couple of financial planning points really. So your ISA allowance, the adult allowance of £20,000, the LISA allowance of £4,000, you know, your junior ISA limits of £9,000, all of those, they are use it or lose it allowances. There's no carry forward or anything like that. You know, you have each tax year to use them. You can do bed and ISA that I touched on, which I think particularly, you know, this tax year will be sort of quite a relevant one, because the cuts we have coming next year and the year after for CGT allowances. You know, if you have got gains outside of ISAs, use your CGT allowances, bed and ISA, so sell the shares, put money into the into the ISA, and then buy the shares back again. You know, we have a process, we have a bed and ISA process to do that all you know, as one thing, rather than doing lots of separate transactions that you have to worry about. Yeah, so we can do that. You make sure you use the allowances, use it between the two of you as well. You know, you've got £40,000 between a married couple, their couple's allowance. Family with 2 kids, you know, you've got £58,000 to use because you've got your £9,000 junior ISA limits as well. 16 to just before you turn 18-year-olds, you've got that 29,000 allowance because you can use your adult limit and your junior ISA limit. Paying into a lifetime ISA, you have got that 25% boost, that government bonus that you get with a LISA as well. Okay, that is all from me on ISAs. So thank you very much for listening to the webinar. I hope you have found that useful, and goodbye.